Hi, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Perfect Prey. I'm glad you're here. My name is Dr. Christine Marie Cocchiola, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and have a doctorate in clinical social welfare, where I researched coercive control and the impact on both adult and child victims. Most importantly, I am a survivor and a protective parent. Victims and survivors of coercive control are never to blame. But I chose the name Perfect Prey because coercive controllers, who are individuals who apparently have characterologically disordered personalities, do choose who to prey upon. They choose people who tend to be agreeable and conscientious, perhaps loyal to a fault, fixers, optimistic, and empathic. Or these coercive controllers prey upon those who are most vulnerable, including our children. It's part of their plan to gain control. How do we help our children when they're experiencing systematic, unacknowledged child abuse? We need to understand how these coercive controllers, harmful individuals, attempt to exert their power over us and our children. We need to look beyond a trauma-informed lens, but also layer it with a coercive control lens. So, let's engage in personal power conversations that will create the protective parts that will derail the coercive controller from his plan. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Perfect Prey. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so honored to have my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Ramani, here to talk with us about narcissistic abuse, coercive control, and of course, it's not you. And you probably know that she wrote the foreword to our book, Framed. So we're so glad to have you here. Thank you so much.
I love seeing you, so it's nice to see you, whether it's virtual or live. I'm very glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think everybody knows who you are, but you're considered the narcissistic abuse expert internationally and really are helping people to elevate this conversation about the harms that they might be experiencing in relationship dynamics. So, did you want to add anything to that or?
That already feels a bit grandiose to me. I just feel as though it's a tough field to be in because it's still something that people are trying to punch holes in. I'm actually really struck by how people are wedded to the idea that this is not a thing. It's gotten worse, and so I do often feel that this is about paddling a canoe upstream. I'm going to keep paddling because I see the merits of this work and working with clients, teaching groups of people, working with therapists, how it informs your work in coercive control. Um, but this isn't getting easier. That's
Yeah.
what I think. In fact, if anything, I would almost argue it's getting harder.
It's interesting because we're actually having this conversation in the midst of the P. Diddy Combs trial, right?
Interesting. Mhm,
And
mhm.
the victim blaming that continues
Continues.
to
And I
occur.
think it's hard, Christine, when I see women doing it. And in the whole issue, right? The issue around, especially around coercive control and emotional abuse, the piece that seems to be the most difficult to not articulate, I think is that for people to uptake. It's the sense of imprisonment when there are no locks or bars, or like this idea of free will has led people down a absolutely erroneous path, like the incapacity of people to understand what trauma does to the brain and the body, what coercive control. You might as well have put the person in a cage, right? There's no getting out. And then how do you calculate it? Like I'm actually stunned at what accurate threat assessment models survivors are able to calculate for themselves. I'd say they're doing better sometimes than some experts do, in the sense of, I actually think they may kill me. I actually think that they're going to come after full custody. I actually think that they're going to empty out the bank accounts. And a lot of people think, "Oh, come on now. That's it. What movie did you see that on?" And they know, and it's true. And I think that it's the not understanding that complete, again, there is this idea that free will exists in this uniform way. That's a very privileged point of view. And that is a core of so much of this, is what happens in these relationships and the power of things like attachment and diminished social status and all of the things that connect us to other people and keep us stuck. It's remarkable to me that people who've gone to law school and been judges and all of that cannot understand this concept.
Yeah, no, it's extremely frustrating. And as you know, most of my clients are dealing with that, right, in the
Yeah.
family court system. And I always say I think there's like two major missing components in trainings. We're talking about all these trainings that judges and lawyers need to have. Absolutely. But we need to talk about this, the character traits of these individuals and actually educate on what that looks like and what that shows up
Mhm.
like in court and what victims show up like in court, because oftentimes victims will behave in uncharacteristically, they just will not behave in character. They'll be out of character because they're so traumatized. And so
Yep.
if we could have that, but also the trauma to these children who are living through this, like the intergenerational trauma that is so preventable. It drives me freaking
Yeah.
nuts that nobody's like talking about this. Yeah.
Well, and I was just speaking about this earlier today. In fact, our systems are only designed for punishment. They are not designed for prevention. And people, survivors of these relationships at all levels, and certainly at the level where many of the folks you're talking to and teaching, the most severe levels, they're still trying to lean into the existing institutional systems that purport to protect, but they exist to punish. Right? So you've got to come in here with a case. You have to show us evidence that something that was wrong, and wrong as defined by the laws on the books, which never involve emotional abuse, right? You have to make that case. So we're waiting for the terrible thing to happen. Right? We're waiting for the person to get beaten up. We're waiting for the person to get killed. That's what's happening. And then for people to say, oops, didn't call that one right. And then everyone forgets about it, except for the people whose lives have been upended by it. We have the data. We know on the basis of personality. And I don't know that in our lifetimes that's ever going to come into the calculations. AI could change the game because it definitely could crunch the numbers in a way that's very different and really start showing predictive models of no, this is really happening. Um, but I still think that I don't know that rehabilitative models are wrong, but they don't work with certain personality and character styles. And I think the problem is using personality and character maps as a decision-making piece of data around rehabilitation. I just don't think we're anywhere near that at this point in history.
Yeah, I think it's a ways out. I agree with you. I
Yep.
mean, we're just getting coercive control recognized, right? And
Mhm.
criminalized in some places, but we are so far off. And then we're having the co-opting of the term against victims
Right.
and survivors, which is
Correct.
what we expected. So, yeah, no, I think we're a ways off. I agree with you. I think you said something like it's this idea of, when you write about it in the book, how so many of these abusers take on victim status.
Mhm.
Right. And that how well that really works in the court system.
Correct. It does. It
And
does.
it's like this
Mhm.
institutional betrayal. Can you speak a little bit about how this antagonistic personality can show up in court and actually still get like the sympathy or the empathy, we can say, right?
Absolutely. It's the, you know what it is? It's the I still think, and if you look at Judith Herman's work, she resonates with what I'm about to, her work is what led me to say what I'm saying. So but it's mirrored in the trauma literature. Everyone still wants to hold on to a just world format, right? And also the idea that the dad is good, the dad is kind, using that gendered format. And so that framework will often guide then that when somebody behaves according to almost that wish of the just world and starts crying, the attribution that's made about that is very beneficent. I really think that. And again, that is why, and Herman argues that so many trauma survivors, on top of all the other reasons, aren't believed. Because to believe a trauma survivor is actually to integrate a belief that the world is a dangerous place
Mhm,
versus you did something foolish, you're the exception,
mhm.
or we're simply not going to believe you so we can maintain this worldview. Nobody's doing that consciously. But I think that that's some of what happens there. So now, the way the narcissistic personality works, just viewing that in an individual as an individual, there's no capacity to integrate anything that is that would imply imperfection or less than in the narcissistic person. The almost delusional internal self is that I'm perfect. I'm an ideal. And obviously that's a defense over ultimately that bottom level of insecurity and fragility and all of that, which anytime something goes wrong, that cauldron of fragility and insecurity pops up, it brings up shame. And the shame is a catalyst for rage in the narcissistic person. But what we see, and this is where Jennifer Fried's work is so important in the whole DARVO mechanism, which she originally developed that construct on perpetrators of sex crimes, but since has found that it generalizes to anybody with that sort of perpetration, and now also narcissistic. She had presented a poster, I think, a year or two ago at a trauma conference with, I think, a graduate student, where they showed that the DARVO, which just DARVO stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. That DARVO mechanism exists across the dark triad, dark tetrad set of traits, which sort of is the base of malignant narcissism and psychopathy. So to portray oneself as the victim almost serves two functions. It preserves the self as being wronged, right? Because narcissistic people, by definition, are always aggrieved. So nothing goes my way. The world is out to get me, the whole witch hunt mentality. And then it also gets them sympathy, which is a form of validation, right? So when that's all happening, it's a tactic that works beautifully because in the relationship, it can often lead the partner to doubt themselves or even now engage in the appeasing and soothing of the harmful partner. And in systems that are so wedded to the just world, see, we're such a great courtroom. Look, he's aware because people want to be oh so self-congratulatory. It plays into that kind of discourse. And then that we want to believe that the guy is crying and finally gets it because then it could, renew everyone's faith in humanity. And I do honestly think that there's those bigger sociological themes that are playing out in these courtrooms, but it's really the narcissistic person getting footing and truly believing that they have been wronged, thus the victimhood. And it feels plausible and people buy it and they buy it every day in court. And then you throw in there that on certain days, that narcissistic person comes into court well composed, articulate, in the right clothes, in the right way. And if the harmed partner and the protective parent is not prepared for this and may show up in court as more dysregulated, which is an appropriate reaction, by the way, to a traumatizing system like court, right? But may show up as dysregulated. Already, there's the hegemony of how we view women in these systems. Oh, hysterical and all those kinds of bad words, right? But now all the focus is on that reaction. The narcissistic person remains composed and assured in the wake of their partner's dysregulation. Okay. So then the next time that narcissistic person shows up and plays victim, it really feels plausible, especially in light of them initially coming into court composed, charming, and all the things.
I think
That's
there's
a
a
very
playbook, right? I mean, we talk about that in Framed. We say the abuser's playbook. They literally are reading from a book. And, to kind of go back to, like you said, that society doesn't want to believe that there's actually like people like this. The other side to that is victims often are blindsided because they don't want to believe someone could actually, the person they loved or the father or the mother of their children, whatever it is, they don't want to believe it either, right? There's that complete disassociation from that. Yeah.
There's a sense of also disloyalty. Many survivors will say it's, and again, it goes, I really do believe that the attachment seeking part of our brain is so powerful when things obviously happen in relationship that attachment in some ways acts like almost like again, it's part of betrayal blindness. Like we can, all right, maybe it's not so bad. And so then the self-blame starts to happen because the attachment, especially in light of things like children and all of that, it's very pronounced for the survivors who not only A, may not want to believe the world is this, but B, feel a sense of disloyalty. In fact, I've had many clients will say, oh, I feel really bad for thinking my husband's narcissistic or my wife's narcissistic or the mother of my kids is narcissistic, whatever it is. Like they'll say, I feel bad about that. That feels like a terrible, even thinking it, they're not even there. Like we're just having a confidential conversation. So all of those things are happening because the harmed party in these relationships is usually quite empathic and nice and warm and trying to make it all work.
Which kind of brings me to the name of the podcast is Perfect Prey. And I think some people maybe get their feathers ruffled a little bit about it, but I truly do believe that abusers choose their victims. Like they literally are scouting around for someone who's going to be able to, they're going to be able to mirror and in some ways feel better in the relationship, because outside of that love and attention they're getting from that relationship, they don't feel good. I just see that victims and survivors, these people choose who they're going to abuse or who they're going to engage in relationship with. What are your thoughts about that?
I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I'd say about that, which is I still think that narcissistic, maybe at the higher levels of malignant narcissism and psychopathy, it could be calculated in that way. But I think that the initial play of the narcissistic person, which is much more status oriented and supply seeking, and the supply has to work for them, is that number one, the narcissistic person doesn't use fishing lines, they use a fishing net. Right. So they're bringing in a lot and they're figuring it out. Right. It's a numbers game for them. And when they find the person, it's like cult indoctrination. They find the people who aren't walking away, clearly like we're going to change your name. Like that's usually when most people are going to look for the doors. But when when the slow things start happening and the person not only is not leaving, I think what happens is that to me, how I read Perfect Prey is that in internal qualities like empathy, compassion, even mental flexibility turn a person into perfect prey. They were not targeted. They were targeted because of good qualities in them, whether it's education, appearance, connections, money, whatever the thing was that was supply or status oriented for the narcissistic person. They put their net in the water, they pull up lots of fish, they choose the ones that fit, they choose multiple of them. Some people drop out early, and they've got one that's staying around. And the one that's staying around, the so-called perfect prey, is the one who through empathy and compassion is making the excuses, is making the justifications, is making it work. That's how I see it, because I still think that the narcissistic person feels entitled to a formidable partner. I don't know that it's necessarily always the broken gazelle model. We're going to go after the gazelle with the bad leg. I think that the bad leg happens in the relationship and it becomes hard to run away.
100%. I totally agree with everything you're saying, because it goes back to that idea of codependency. It's not that they choose people who are codependent and have those traits. It's that someone may eventually become more accommodating in a relationship,
Right.
and that's the other side of it. And being able to find someone in a sea of people that is going to be willing to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because they are empathic, because they are agreeable, because they're highly conscientious. Yeah, all of those traits. And so, and that's something we talked about, I think, before when we went to a conference, this idea of the spectrum of behavior, because you just hit on that a little bit. Not all narcissists are coercive controllers, right? But all coercive controllers certainly are narcissistic abusers. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you mean that?
Yeah, and I think this drives a lot of the confusion for survivors, right? So, Christine, honestly, if somebody listened to your podcast, they might say, maybe I'm not in a narcissistic relationship. Like, I've got a credit card, I can come and go as I please. They actually wanted to rush the divorce along because they'd already found someone new. And while it didn't feel great, like it's not this, okay? And I think that gets into this idea that all personality, we live in a world where we want labels, and labels tend to be dichotomous. Narcissist, not narcissist, depressed, not depressed. That is not how mental health works. That is not how personality works. It's all a continuum, right? So even a healthy trait like agreeableness, if a person is too agreeable, they may be too accommodating, too amenable, and actually put themselves in positions of harm or being taken advantage of. If a person's not at all agreeable, well, that's a narcissist, right? So you're going for the middle of the curve, enough of the good trait, right? A person's too conscientious, that looks like obsessive compulsive disorder, right? It's too much focus on or obsessive compulsive personality. Well, narcissism's no different. And at the mild end, I actually think we see someone who's more emotionally stunted, who's pathologically selfish, who lives life as sort of a hybridized 17-year-old and 4-year-old at the same time, throwing tantrums, not willing to empty the dishwasher. But, again, they may be married to someone and have kids with them, but still want to stay up all night and play video games and not help out, or won't let the partner know they're running home. Running late. There's an irresponsibility that feels, again, very immature, very stunted, very childish. Okay. That's a relationship that's frustrating. It is annoying. It can even be exhausting. But I don't think people in those relationships are walking around saying they're traumatized, right? But it's not easy. But it's not what we see at the severe end of the spectrum, which is, like, again, coercive, exploitative, deeply manipulative, isolating, predatory. It's dangerous. It's psychologically dangerous. At times, it's even physically dangerous, not just for the partner, but also for children, pets, and anyone else who's in the environment, right? So those are going to result in different kinds of behaviors. So in a more mild narcissistic relationship, it's going to be someone saying, oh, I can't believe you're asking me to empty the dishwasher. I worked really hard this week, but the partner also works and all this other stuff. So you're getting into a dishwasher fight. At the severe end, the behavior is going to be things, like it's a menacing threat. Like, I was in the military, how I could do things and no one would ever even know what I did. But I don't need to talk about that. So it's like this quiet menace that's always sprinkled. That's very different than not emptying the dishwasher. In one case, you think someone's going to kill you while you sleep. In the other, you're like, I can't believe I'm emptying the dishwasher again. Both feel invalidating, but one is people who go through coercive control look more like they have CPTSD. And so I think that there is a difference, but the narcissism is the narcissism, right? It's the entitlement, it's all the stuff, the low empathy, but it's a matter of degree. It's like a volume button and how that shows up. And it does sometimes mean different treatment approaches. It means different things are going to happen in court. It's not to say that more mildly narcissistic person is not going to be very difficult and even vindictive in court. I think that for many narcissistic people, when their back is against the wall, you can see some really punitive, immature, invalidating behavior. That you can see that. But then again, it's a matter of degree. So that it's important to remember that continuum.
Many of you listening to my podcast are protective parents. I hope you know that I created the protective parenting program as a result of my own experiences. Children who had continuously heard a false narrative and were harmed by a coercive control or narcissistic abuser. We have to counteract the false narrative, the abuser's narrative. The protective parenting program is created with 9 modules of information, 180 pages of workbook content, and is offered self-study or with live coaching. I truly believe in it, and I hear over and over again from protective parents that it is a game changer for them. Many parents tell me they wish they took it sooner. It is more than gentle parenting. It is more than responding to attachment, which is so vital to our children. It is really about elevating their experiences and who we are in their lives so that they see clearly that we are that safe parent, that we are on their team, that we get what is occurring, that we know how they are being harmed. Oftentimes as trauma victims, this is challenging. That's why in the program, I also talk about our own trauma and our own grief and loss. The weight and the burden of this is heavy, but you do not have to do it alone. We can walk alongside each other and support each other. Yeah, no, I think what you're like the idea that some people can do mediation with narcissists when they
I don't think so. I always tell people you need a lawyer. You cannot. You're going to waste more money on the mediation and the paid judges and the this and the that. Get a lawyer who gets it, and then get right in there. Because I think there is still, again, to me, that's still that hope that maybe this wasn't as bad as I think. No, it's as bad as you think.
Right. And so knowing going in that
Yeah.
it could get worse and preparing yourself is going to be, I think that's, you talk about the industrial divorce complex and framed and in the forward. And so it's interesting how we need lawyers. We need them to do a good job. We need lawyers who get it. But also that there is this industrial divorce complex. Can you explain that a little bit to everyone?
So in that book we were just reading a book, I think you're gonna have the author on too in a few weeks, who wrote, it came up again, the book Murder in the Dollhouse, but it doesn't have to just be that book, any story of this. The divorce industrial complex is a multi-billion-dollar industry that incentivizes, in some ways, these really, really abusive, narcissistic divorces are a cash cow. And while people might take umbrage at me saying it, they are. They're everyone in family courts making money. Custody evaluators are making money. GALs are making money. People doing these psych evals are making money. Everyone is making money. And the more antagonistic the dynamics of the divorce, the more money that's exchanging hands. Okay. And so I'm not saying that the court incentivizes it, because I think in the same breath, the judges and other folks get frustrated. And the judge just, it's like widgets, right? You just want to keep them moving along the assembly line. Then one of these divorces comes up. It really sucks a lot of the oxygen. It takes a lot of time. Everyone's really frustrated. It's the bad part of your day. So, but there are a lot of people making money. And I think that I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think that after a person's gone through a narcissistic relationship, injustice is such a part of the relationship. There is such an inequity, even the sense that the world still thinks this is a good person and they've done such cruel things behind closed doors, right? So I think people go into family court seeking justice. They see a courtroom and scales and all the things. And I'm like, this is where you're least likely to get it. So there's also that sense that even a person who's been through a narcissistic relationship, if they're not sort of coached on what you're about to walk into, there could be the misplaced hope that justice is going to happen here and more money is thrown at this. And that's why I always tell people, don't tell me what you think you deserve. Tell me what you can live with. That we can get you out of here with that. We can parachute you out of this with that much. I know it's going to be a dip down in your lifestyle. Everything's going to change. But if you keep fighting for some of these things, you will lose the rest of yourself that you haven't fully lost in this relationship. That's a hard thing to communicate to people. And it's because it is a very, very flawed system. And it is not a system that's focused on child welfare. And I
Well,
think a
there you
lot of people think that that's what the judge is going to rule for what's best for my kid. I said, that's you no more than the judge cares which of you is getting the station wagon or the minivan. Does the judge is not thinking of it. It's like, how can we get this divided in a way that I don't need to see these people again?
Yeah, I mean, I think the judges continuously think that these are high conflict cases when they're actually abuse, right? And so I always say when we hear the word high conflict, that's a big red flag that there's something else going on. What's the foundation of that parental subsystem historically, but people don't look at it. But to your point, I do this divorce custody coaching on the side a little bit and help people. And the idea is, what can you let go of? Because if you don't let go of something, you're going to sink. Sadly, right? If you say that, and this is really hard when we're talking about child safety. I
Yes,
mean, I was just on a call earlier today and I said to the mom, I don't really perceive, I understand. She has a full protective order, but the child still has to go twice a week to see dad. And I don't perceive you getting full custody or supervised visitation. And the concern is that if you walk in the door and you push for that, you have to be ready to backpedal out of it. Because if you don't, you are going to be seen as the adversarial party.
correct. That's it. You nailed it. And that's what I'm saying is that the system enables the narcissistic person because it continues. Just as a person was silenced in the narcissistic relationship, they're silenced in these institutional systems, thus the institutional betrayal. Again,
Mhm.
Freud's work is that the institution is not protecting those whom it purported to protect, number one, and the institution's the only game in town. It's not like you can go shopping. Like, I don't like this family court. I'm going to go try that one down the street. This is not a privatized business. This is run, give it a second, that's coming, but it's being run by a governmental entity. So you got to work with what you've got. I mean, some of it's even luck. So which judge, all of those things, what time you end up on the docket. There's so many random variables, but you're absolutely right, is that pushing for what is the right thing to do. I mean, how many parents are out there saying, I just want to get my kids in the car and get them out of here because this is so unsafe. I'm like, yeah, and you're looking at a kidnapping charge, which is
Mhm.
basically now you've lost custody of your kids. So
Mhm.
even the instinct to do the right thing has to be silenced. And this is after years or decades of having been silenced in the relationship.
Yeah.
So it's a re-traumatization. Family court in many cases is a re-traumatization.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that, one of the things like from a clinical perspective, and I know we both share this as part of our work, is trying to help people to make the decisions that are best and the right decisions, but also knowing that sometimes they're trapped and they can't. Like
Right.
my
Oh, yeah.
job is to keep my children safe, but I can't keep my children safe. I've shared this a little bit online, but I've had about probably now 20 cases since January where mothers have just shared that their children have disclosed some kind of sexual abuse, UTIs, pediatrician sends the mother to get a restraining order. The mother gets a restraining order. The judge flips custody to father. I
Yep.
mean, this is the world we're living in. It's not just I always say we may not be able to keep our children safe, but how can we keep them the safest?
Mhm.
And for me, that is how do we give them as much time as possible with you, knowing they cannot have all their time with you, that the system won't allow that.
Mhm.
It's
Now,
crazy.
well, some of what I'm going to say is also related to less severe cases than the ones we're talking about. It's and in sometimes in many cases, sort of the proverbial cat's already out of the bag, if you will, because is I once said to a client, I said, I need to train you to be as disinterested in your kids as possible. Because once the narcissistic person, it's like a deal, right? You're negotiating a deal. You're like, really, you want that land parcel A, but you keep focusing on land parcels B and C because you desperately want A. But if they knew you want A, they're going to drive the price of A up. So it's the person who where you're going in and you're gritting your teeth and making your hands bleed because you're squeezing so hard, but you're saying, listen, I'm going to enjoy this balance and use some of this time on my own. But the one mistake I sometimes have seen people say is like, I can't believe it. It's just their one day and they're not going to pick up the kids. I'm like, this is cause for celebration. Document, but any day they don't take the kids,
100%.
you keep them. I think sometimes again that drive for justice is what leads people to say, well, that's not, I said, cancel your other plans. Any day you're in the house with your kids is a win.
That's
And
right.
so that's where some of these little gets happen. Because listen, by and large, most narcissistic people are not up to the job of raising children. They really aren't. They're
No,
completely, I've yet to meet the narcissistic person who's genuinely interested in doing hands-on caregiving. I've never seen it, never seen it. So their fight for the kids is to stick, most cases, to stick it to the other parent for optics. So the world says, oh, what a great parent you are with your kids, on your own. To create a pseudo family, they meet a new partner and they're trying to quickly like create an insta family kind of a situation, right? Those are the kinds of things we see. But the idea of the day-to-day haul of raising kids and getting them to school and making the lunches, narcissistic people aren't interested in this. They're doing it to stick it to you. So to the degree, again, not in cases where it's a little different conversation where there's acute harm, but even in those cases, I promise you in many of those cases, they're going to get bored with this, right? But many a narcissistic person will want the custody still on paper to look 50-50 because their support payment is lower. And yet you're doing 80-20. If you can swing it, not everyone can, but if you can swing it and not go back to court and you're like de facto, you're at 80-20, they're not paying more, and you can do it, even if it's belt tightening, do it. The
yes.
ultimate safety is more time with your kids in your home that is not chaotic, that is not manipulative, that is not gaslighted, is going to be the win for your kids. But I think what people do, I'm going back to court, and I'll often say to clients, is this
It's
necessary?
worth
Can
it.
we work without this happening? And in some cases, no, we couldn't. But in many cases, but I'm with them 80% of the time, and I should be getting this much more money. I said, can you do it without it? And they're like, yeah, but, and I'm like, can you do it without it? And they'll say, yep. And then I'll say, then guess what? So that's the challenges. And then giving the client the opportunity to share the injustice of it. It's this
That's our work.
terribly unfair. That's our work. But strategically speaking, every day you're in the same home as your kids, you have
Right.
just slotted a win.
Yeah, allowing them to grieve. all
Yeah,
that is lost.
absolutely.
Right. And I always say there's so many wonderful interventions for trauma, but the first and foremost thing that most of our clients need is validation and to know they're not alone. And I use it's kind of maybe a little mean, but I say you do not want to rattle the cage of the abuser, of the monster, because as soon as you rattle it, he's going to know that matters to you. It's
That's
like bees on
exactly
honey,
right.
but worse than that. So, yeah. And so is there something that's not fair? Absolutely. But you're never going to get fair.
Never going to get
And
fair.
if he
Fair left.
knows, and if he knows you're happy about not like, if he knows that you're happy, he doesn't want to see the kids. Be careful.
Be
You don't
careful.
want to show him you're happy
No.
about
If
this.
he says like, I can't get the kids to say, you might even you have to get your acting chops up, like, oh, okay, fine,
Oh,
but meanwhile you're like, yes. I remember one woman, I played it beautifully. She desperately wanted that particular date with her kid, desperately, and the father was fighting it, fighting and fighting it. But she was very clever, and he'd called her and something about that day, which meant so much. And he was taunting her. She's like, "Are you kidding me? No problem. I'm going to be seeing Lucy. I haven't seen Lucy forever. We're going to spend this whole day checking out this waterfall and this hike." Inside of an hour, he's like, "I can't be bothered with dropping these kids off all over the place. We figure this out." And she was thrilled. She got to do the thing. She was like a game or something she wanted to see. Boom. But the idea that she was going to have fun with Lucy, oh no.
that's right.
She
That's
played
right.
it like a pro, and she got to be at the thing that actually mattered to her. And he was too dumb to realize the mother she was, to know that there was no hike, no waterfall, and no friend at that point in her life that was going to supplant wanting to see her kids. But he thought he was taking something from her. He was so lost in the game, he couldn't actually ever see the woman. He never did.
Yeah, no, they're, too bad. Oftentimes victims and survivors are playing checkers and abusers are playing chess. We kind of have to level up and play chess and understand where they're coming from. I always say to my clients, you know your abuser better than anyone.
Yes, you do.
Like,
Mhm.
stop for a minute. Really stop. What do you think is next? You know?
I think the hard part is after what so many survivors slash victims have been through for so many years, and what we know about trauma is that the not being protected is sometimes worse than the original traumatic wound, is that for the first time ever, maybe now a system is there to protect them, whether it's a couples therapist, whether it's a court system. There is such a desperate hope, almost like a child being abused, like maybe this person coming in the door is going to rescue me. Maybe this system will rescue me. And so that desperate hope is still there, that this will finally, and that really looking into that deep abyss, saying this is it's about it being even more strategic than that, is that they're trying to hurt you, so you can't ever, it's like playing poker, you cannot have a tell. And that's not how people are often thought to think. It's sort of like, I'm going to fight for my kids like a mother lion. I'm like, no, 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 we're not saying mother lion. We
Right.
are, we're almost going to turn you into indifferent mother,
Mm.
just to get us through this crisis.
Yeah, no, there is a strategy and they're using a strategy and we have to have one to counteract theirs. Yeah.
But are they using a strategy? I would say
Mm.
it's not strategy as much as it's their psychology.
Oh, I love that you put it. I love that you just framed it that way. Sometimes I feel
You're
bad.
giving them too much credit by saying it's a strategy, right? I don't think they're really smart evil geniuses. I actually think that it is the narcissistic person is so overtaken with vindictiveness and revenge, but it's mixed in with that really lethal combination of also charm and confidence. And then there's this competitive need to win. So it's not strategy as much as all of our systems bend and yield to people who are like this.
Mhm. See, I still have in me a little of that, like hopeful kind of, I go there.
You're
Some-
younger than me, darling. Trust me, in a minute, it too will be gone. And so,
yeah, sharing a room with Catherine Barrett has started to cure that.
yes,
She does a little slapping around, but anyway, thank you so much for
oh, it's
being
my
here.
pleasure. I love
Everybody,
seeing
if you
it.
haven't read, oh my, well, you see my sticky notes there.
Thank- I love seeing the sticky notes in the book. Thank
Yeah,
you.
all my notes. And please make sure you read, and for sure, the
Yes,
forward from Dr. Ramani, which is absolutely beautiful. We really appreciate your support of our efforts.
of
And
course, it's my pleasure.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to Perfect Prey. You can find the show on my website at iknowyourheart.com or coercivecontrolconsulting.com, or subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts. I'd love your feedback, and I'm always looking for ideas on how to continue to expose coercive control as the significant harm and child abuse that it is. The best way to support the show is to rate and review Perfect Prey on Apple Podcasts. It helps others to find us. Perfect Prey is written by me, Dr. Christine Cocchiola, and with the help of my amazing assistant, Sheena Pastor. Thank you, and have a great day, everyone.